For decades, the world has heard countless stories about Michael Jackson. The fame, the genius, the controversies, and the mystery surrounding his life. But now, at 69, Steve Harvey is finally opening up about what he witnessed. From moments few people ever saw to the truth about Michael's personality, Harvey's revelations are surprising fans everywhere. Was Michael misunderstood? What was he like when the spotlight disappeared? Join us in this video as we dive into Steve Harvey's thoughts, stories, and the shocking truth he says people never understood about the King of Pop. Steve Harvey finally reveals what Michael Jackson told him. The crisis that changed everything for Michael Jackson began in February 2003, when Living with Michael Jackson aired on television. Millions of people around the world were watching that night, including Steve Harvey, who was sitting at home in Los Angeles expecting to see Michael finally tell his side of the story. But before the documentary had even finished airing, Steve's phone rang. It was Michael, and he was crying. "I've never heard a grown man sound so broken," Steve would later admit, still shaken by the memory years afterward. He kept saying, "They tricked me, Steve. I trusted him. I let him into my home, into my life, and he tricked me." What stood out to Steve wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. Michael sounded devastated, completely blindsided, like someone who had just realized the world was about to turn against him again. For Michael, the documentary was never supposed to become a scandal. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Martin Bashir, a respected British journalist at the time, had spent months following Michael around, filming private moments at Neverland Ranch, sitting with him during emotional conversations, and gaining access almost nobody else had ever received. Michael believed people would finally see the real him. The cameras captured him with his children, walking through Neverland, talking openly about his lonely childhood, his career, his fears, and his love for helping sick children. For once, Michael thought he was being understood instead of mocked. Instead, according to Steve, the final documentary painted a completely different picture. Bashir's editing and narration made Michael appear strange, unstable, and dangerous. The most controversial moment came when Michael spoke about sharing his bedroom with children, including a young cancer patient named Gavin Arvizo. Michael explained that he often gave children the bed while he slept on the floor, seeing it as an act of kindness and comfort. But the documentary didn't present the moment with sympathy. It presented it with suspicion. The narration carried a tone that made viewers uncomfortable. And within hours, the backlash exploded worldwide. Steve said Michael immediately understood what was coming next. "He called me in a panic," Steve recalled, "not because he was guilty of something, but because he knew how the media worked. He knew once they picked a story, facts didn't matter anymore." And sadly, Michael's fears became reality. Only weeks later, the Arvizo family, the same family Michael had supported during their son's illness, accused him of sexual misconduct. Suddenly, the documentary wasn't just entertainment anymore. It became the spark that ignited one of the most public legal battles in celebrity history. The man leading the investigation was Tom Sneddon, the same prosecutor who had unsuccessfully pursued Michael years earlier during the 1993 allegations. This time, according to Steve, the pressure surrounding Michael felt even more intense. And during that period, Michael told Steve something he says he never forgot. Michael looked at me and said, "Steve, they don't want justice. They want me destroyed." Steve paused while remembering the conversation. Then he said, "Not just my career. They want me humiliated, erased, because I'm too successful, too powerful, too black, and too different to play by their rules." Steve admitted that some people might hear those words and think Michael was paranoid. Others might say he was trying to make himself a victim. But Steve insists that after witnessing everything that happened afterward, he no longer saw those comments as paranoia. He saw them as predictions. In November 2003, authorities raided Neverland Ranch with a massive police operation. Officers searched the property while helicopters circled overhead and cameras waited outside the gates. News footage of investigators walking through Michael's private rooms instantly spread across television networks around the world. To Steve, the entire thing felt humiliating on purpose. The images were everywhere, he said. It was like they wanted the world to see Michael brought down. During that time, Michael stopped trusting most people. According to Steve, he became isolated and emotionally exhausted. But somehow, Michael still reached out to him. He did want many people around, Steve explained. But I think he trusted me because I never treated him like a superstar. I never wanted anything from him. I was just his friend. A few days after the raid, Steve visited Neverland. What he saw shocked him. The ranch that was normally full of music, laughter, and activity felt empty and lifeless. Many staff members had already been sent home. The amusement ride sat completely still. The energy that once made the place feel magical was gone. And then Steve saw Michael. He looked smaller. Steve remembered. He'd lost weight. His face looked tired. His eyes looked hollow. But one detail stayed with Steve more than anything else. His hand was shaking. This was the same man who had performed in front of stadiums packed with screaming fans. The same performer whose dance moves changed music forever. Yet now, Steve said Michael couldn't even hold a cup of coffee steady. The two men sat together for hours. Michael walked Steve through everything. The accusations, the timelines, the inconsistencies in stories being told about him, and the fear that his entire life was collapsing in front of him. But according to Steve, one question kept coming up again and again. Why do they hate me so much? Steve says that question was real. Michael genuinely wanted to understand. That's what people never understood, Steve explained. Michael wasn't asking for sympathy. He honestly couldn't figure out why people hated him with so much intensity. In Michael's mind, he had spent his life trying to make people happy. Through music, charity work, and helping sick children, he believed he was putting love into the world. Yet somehow, the world now saw him as a monster. Then came a moment Steve says he can never forget. While they were sitting in the kitchen talking, Michael's young son, Prince Jackson, walked into the room. At the time, he was only around 6 years old. The little boy looked at his father innocently and asked, "Daddy, why do people on TV say bad things about you?" Steve said the question shattered Michael instantly. I watched his face completely fall apart. Steve remembered emotionally. Michael knelt down, hugged his son tightly, and softly told him, "Sometimes people fear what they don't understand, but the truth will come out." Prince eventually left the room, and the second he did, Michael lowered his head into his hands and started crying. For Steve Harvey, a man famous for jokes, laughter, and always finding humor even during difficult situations, there was nothing funny about that moment. "I sat there thinking about my own kids," Steve admitted. "I thought about how painful it would be to explain to them why the world believed terrible things about their father. I couldn't imagine carrying that kind of weight." But despite the pain, Steve also witnessed something surprising that day. He witnessed Michael's determination. After breaking down emotionally, Michael eventually looked back up at Steve and said something that stayed with him forever. "I'm going to fight this," Michael told him. "Not just for me, but for my children. Because if I let people destroy me without fighting back, what lesson does that teach them? That you should stay silent when people lie about you? That you should give up?" That was the moment, Steve says, when he truly understood Michael Jackson's strength. "The world saw somebody weak," Steve explained. "They saw somebody strange, somebody fragile. But I saw a man being attacked from every direction, betrayed by people he trusted, facing prison, public humiliation, and the possibility of losing everything." Then Steve paused before finishing his thought. And somehow, he still refused to completely break. That, Steve said quietly, is real strength. But what really happened during Michael Jackson's terrifying courtroom nightmare afterward? Inside Michael Jackson's darkest courtroom battle, when the trial of Michael Jackson officially began in January 2005, the entire world seemed to stop and watch. For 5 long months, the courthouse in Santa Maria became the center of non-stop media chaos. News vans lined the streets before sunrise. Reporters fought for updates every single day. Crowds gathered outside carrying signs, cameras, and opinions about a man many had already judged before the trial even started. According to Steve Harvey, it felt less like a legal case and more like a public execution. Every morning, Michael had to walk through screaming crowds just to enter the courthouse. Fans cried for him. Protesters shouted against him. Photographers chased every expression on his face. Every movement became headline news. People weren't just watching the trial. They were watching Michael himself. The media analyzed everything. The way he walked, the way he dressed, the way he spoke, even the way he looked at people in the courtroom. His entire life was being pulled apart on live television. Steve stayed close to Michael during that period, even though Michael specifically asked him not to attend the court proceedings in person. He didn't want me connected to it, Steve explained later. He was trying to protect me. And to Steve, that said everything about Michael's character. Here he was fighting for his freedom, fighting for his name, and somehow he was still worried about other people getting hurt because of him. Even from a distance, Steve followed the trial obsessively. He watched the news coverage, studied court transcripts, and spoke directly with people connected to Michael's legal team. And the more he learned, the more disturbed he became. Because according to Steve, what the public was hearing outside the courtroom looked completely different from what was actually happening inside it. The prosecution's case was falling apart, Steve said bluntly. Witnesses were reportedly contradicting themselves. Timelines changed. Stories shifted under cross-examination. The credibility of the Arvizo family was taking serious damage as defense attorneys pointed out inconsistencies in their claims and past behavior. There was no physical evidence, Steve explained. No proof. No solid corroboration. Just accusations. But despite that, the media narrative barely changed. Television coverage continued focusing on Michael's appearance, his eccentric personality, and moments that made him seem unstable in the public eye. One day, headlines exploded after Michael arrived late to court wearing pajama bottoms because of severe back pain and medication following a hospital visit. Instead of sympathy, he became a punchline. Courtroom sketches exaggerated his appearance. Commentators mocked him nightly on television. Late-night comedians turned the trial into entertainment. To Steve, it felt like the verdict had already been decided by the public long before the jury ever reached deliberations. The story had already been written, he said. Michael Jackson was guilty in people's minds, and the trial was just there to make official. But during the middle of the case, Steve finally decided to ask Michael the question that had been weighing heavily on him. One night, he called him directly. I asked him point blank. Steve remembered. Michael, tell me the truth. Did you do any of this? Then came silence. Not a quick pause. A long silence. Steve said it felt like Michael was gathering himself emotionally before answering. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Steve, Michael said softly, I have never harmed a child. Not in thought, not in word, not in deed. Then he added something Steve says he never forgot. I would rather die than hurt a child. Steve believed him. Not because he was blinded by fame. Not because he was a loyal fan. But because of everything he had personally witnessed over the years. I'd seen Michael around children, Steve explained. I watched how he interacted with them. It never felt sexual. It never felt predatory. What Steve saw instead was someone emotionally stuck between adulthood and childhood. Someone trying to recreate the innocence he felt had been stolen from him growing up inside the brutal machine of fame. It was unusual, Steve admitted, but unusual doesn't mean criminal. That distinction, Steve believed, was something much of the world refused to consider. Finally, after months of testimony, arguments, and relentless media attention, the verdict day arrived on June 13, 2005. This time, Michael asked Steve to come, not directly into the courtroom, but nearby. I think he just needed to know somebody who believed him was close. Steve said, the tension that day was unbearable. Cameras crowded every entrance. Thousands of fans and reporters waited outside the courthouse for history to be made. Then the jury returned. Not guilty. Not guilty on all 14 counts. Inside the courtroom, Michael's family broke down emotionally. Supporters outside erupted into celebration. Around the world, fans cried tears of relief. But when Steve finally saw Michael afterward, he noticed something strange. Michael didn't look victorious. He looked exhausted, drained. Steve expected relief, maybe even happiness. Instead, Michael quietly looked at him and said something that would stay with Steve forever. We won, he said softly. Then after a pause, he added, but I lost everything anyway. Why Steve Harvey finally revealed the truth. For nearly 20 years, Steve Harvey stayed quiet about Michael Jackson. He watched the documentaries. He watched the interviews. He watched the endless arguments about whether Michael was innocent or guilty. And through all of it, he said almost nothing publicly. Even in 2019, when Leaving Neverland reignited worldwide debate around the allegations against Michael, Steve still refused to speak. Friends encouraged him to share what he knew. Fans constantly asked for his perspective. But according to Steve, he wasn't ready. I made